November 1997. Here we go, folks. The moment we've all been waiting for. I have memories. I was still working at Illyria Arts, but there are other things I remember about November of 1997. I feel like maybe I've built this up a little too much because it's nothing earth shattering, but it is something, finally. So before we get to the books that I read, let's talk about my old man memory. So, in November of 1997, I have this hair that's just going crazy. Um, in Elyria, Ohio, where I'm from, when I was a kid growing up, the place to be was Midway Mall. It had two bookstores, a Walden Books and a B. Dalton, and a theater inside the mall with two screens. Um, Baskin Robbins, a toy store. It was KB Toys. And so I spent a lot of time at the mall, and of course I spent a lot of time at the bookstores. By 1997, the theater was outside the mall now. They built a theater with 10 screens. A lot of the stores had changed. B. Dalton was gone. KB Toys was gone. Walden Books was still there. Now, I can't remember if at this time it had changed to a Borders Express, because at some point it did change to a Borders Express. It was in a smaller storefront, and at the end of the year, they took over another storefront and just had a calendar store, huge calendar store. So, as someone who went to the bookstore all the time, I knew people that worked there, had an acquaintance. So in November of 1997, I was at the bookstore, wanted to say hello to my acquaintance, was told that she was working at the calendar store, a couple doors down. So I went over to the calendar store to say hello to my friend, and she was on a break, but there was a young lady working there. We will call her Jane. That's not her name, but that's what we're going to call her. She and I got to talking, and I eventually asked for her number, asked if she'd be interested in going out. She said yes, and so started one of the most tumultuous platonic relationships of my life. Because we went out a couple of times, but just we became very, very good friends, but it was bizarre, as I said, tumultuous. But at this point, when we first went out, we went to dinner and we were talking. This is actually a story I've mentioned before, so some of you have probably heard about this. We were talking about this and that, getting to know each other. We were talking about books, and somehow in the conversation, I mentioned this wonderful nonfiction book I had read, The Labyrinths of Reason. And Jane stopped, picked up her purse, opened it up, reached inside, and pulled out a copy of Labyrinths of Reason. And from then on, well, for a while, we were nearly inseparable. Spent a lot of time together. So I met somebody, became friends with this person, and as the next few months in real time or fake past time, in the next few weeks in YouTube time, you'll hear more about this. But that's the memory that I have. This is when I met Jane and was amazed that someone else had not only heard of but read Labyrinths of Reason. And my life got a little bizarre. And you're going to see some things, I think, or hear some things that are going to be interesting in the books that I read over the next few months. Again, in past time, next few weeks in YouTube time, because we shared. She gave me things or suggested things that I should read. I suggested things that she should read. And so you're going to see a lot of different things on the list for a little bit. Not completely different, but some new things. But, alright, all of that being said, there's the memory. Was it worth the wait? Let me know. But let's get to the books. And the first book that I read in November of 1997 was Bone in the Throat by Anthony Bourdain. Yes, that Anthony Bourdain. At this point, I had never heard of the guy. I had no idea who he was. I happened to be at the library, saw a book that looked interesting, picked it up, and it's a mystery. Let's see, look at my notes. The main character is Tommy Pagana, and he's a cook or a chef, whatever you would call him. And he goes to work in I think it's his uncle's restaurant, but there's mob involvement and murder, and Tommy's just trying to figure out what's going on, stay alive. It's a lighthearted, kind of a Carl Hyacin kind of thing, with, interesting characters and this central mystery, but more going on than that. And it's pretty good. I enjoyed it. Again, I'd never heard of Anthony Bourdain. At this point, to me, he was just some guy that wrote a mystery. Although, of course, I read his author biography, and knew that I think he'd already written Kitchen Confidential before this, but it's pretty good. And I followed that up with Gone Bamboo by Anthony Bourdain. I don't know if these are the only two pieces of fiction that he wrote, but in Gone Bamboo, our main character is Henry Denard. He is an ex-CIA assassin. He has gone to the Caribbean with his wife, sort of retired, but also kind of in hiding because he did not kill the last person he was assigned to kill. That person has decided to turn state's evidence against the mob, and so is put into witness protection and ends up in the exact same place as Henry Denard. And so there's the mob coming down and the government coming down and Henry in the middle. And it's another, less of a mystery than the first one, but still another Carl Hyacin-like, quirky, funny, and interesting book. I really enjoyed both of these books by Anthony Bourdain. If you're a fan of his, I've never watched any of his shows. But if you are a fan of his shows, of any of his other stuff, maybe give these a try. They were fun. Next, we have something I had in common with Jane. She was a huge fan of this. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Halloween Reign by Christopher Golden and Nancy Holder. And this, right up my alley. There's a legend that, at least in the book, that Halloween Reign will bring a spirit into a scarecrow, something like that. But it's Sunnydale, it's Halloween, and this spirit that comes to life in this pumpkin-headed scarecrow is the spirit of Samhain, and which, not good. And Samhain brings zombies, and of course there's vampires, because again, it's Sunnydale. And it's just good Buffy the Vampire Slayer fun, and I like pumpkin-headed monsters, I like scarecrows, and I am a fan of Buffy. I'm a fan of Christopher Golden, big fan. And Nancy Holder, I think Nancy Holder, my experience with Nancy Holder is that she's a very good writer, but she has, again, in my experience, trouble with endings. The one that always comes to mind, which I don't know that it's come up yet, it was an Angel novel that she wrote, and it builds and builds and builds. There's a big bad that Angel's going to fight, And then when you get to the final confrontation, it's like one paragraph that says, Angel kicked and punched and defeated the demon. I mean, it was horrible. A huge letdown. And then I read a science fiction trilogy of hers, which eventually will come up here. And it was all very, very good until the end of the entire trilogy. And I thought the ending of that was a letdown. But in general, her writing itself, I think her ideas probably are very good. Maybe she just has Stephen King syndrome. I don't know. But Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Halloween Reign, Christopher Golden, and Nancy Holder. Pretty good stuff. Next up, we have some nonfiction. Bizarro Among the Savages by Dan Pereiro. Dan Pereiro is the writer and artist of the used to be daily comic strip Bizarro. It was a one-panel comic strip along the lines of The Far Side, but I personally thought it was much, much better. I enjoyed The Far Side, but if The Far Side is a Big Mac, then Bizarro is a filet mignon. I don't know. But anyway, what Bizarro Among the Savages is a memoir of Dan Pereiro's book tour. And this was before Kickstarter, Indiegogo, any of that sort of thing. And he wanted to go on a book tour to promote his latest book, which of course was a collection of Bizarro comic strips. And his publisher didn't want to put up the money. So Dan Pereiro went on the internet and basically asked his fans to help him with this book tour. And I don't remember if they paid for his travel, but people would volunteer to pick him up at the airport, feed him, give him lodging. And it wasn't always just a single person in a city. He might be picked up at the airport by one person, and they would drive him to the house of a completely different person, which is where he'd have dinner, and then maybe stay the night there, or maybe they would then take him to somebody else's house where he would stay the night, and then somebody else would take him to the airport when he had to go back. He'd have rides to the bookstore or wherever he was doing his signing. And he did this all across the country. I actually met him during the tour that he talks about. I was very upset when I read this book that he barely mentions. Like, some of the cities get whole chapters, and he just, in a sentence that mentions multiple places, I believe, he mentions that he came to Cleveland. He was at the Borders in Westlake. And it was pure coincidence. I just happened to be going to Borders, and I held the door open for him. I didn't even know who it was. I got to the door. There was someone behind me. I held the door open. He walked in. I thought, that guy looks familiar. And then he walked straight in ahead of me, and they started setting up a table in his books and stuff. So I got to meet him. I bought the book that he was promoting and got to talk to him. He was very cool. But it was interesting to read this, and he was fearful that there would be crazy people trying to take advantage. But the thing that stands out the most in this book, spoilers for anybody who might read it, was that he found out his wife was having an affair during this book tour. He was home for a weekend or something. I don't remember. And he needed to print something. If I remember this correctly, he needed to print something off the computer, and it ended up printing correspondence between his wife, who I want to say was in community theater. It was a correspondence between his wife and someone from the community theater with whom she was having an affair. And so he actually finished his book tour with this knowledge. I don't remember. I would assume he left immediately. Left his wife. I don't recall. But, I mean, that was huge. And to put it in this book, I think, was huge. But, yeah, Bizarro Among the Savages. Fascinating book. It's funny and heartbreaking. Very, very good. Excuse me. Then something a little lighter than at least part of the last book. Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, Doomsday, Book 3, Wreckage, by Eric Fine and Pierce Askegren. Askegren. Don't know how you say it. Never known how to say it. Book 3, obviously the completion of this Spider-Man Doomsday trilogy. First book was Spider-Man and the Hulk. Second book was Spider-Man and Iron Man. Now we have Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. Dr. Doom, throughout all 3 books, trying to take over the world. In this one, he breaks Dr. Octopus out of prison to help him. 2 doctors are better than 1. I don't know. But it's just good, fun Spider-Man Fantastic Four adventure. I'm a Dr. Doom fan. Spider-Man fan. I like Fantastic Four. Dr. Octopus is okay. Just a fine book. Now something crazy. And you're going to have to bear with me here, because I'm going to have to read a lot. The next book that I read in November of 1997 is titled Naked Came the Manatee. And this book was written by Carl Hyacin, Elmore Leonard, Dave Barry, James W. Hall, Edna Buchanan, Les Standiford, Paul Levine, Brian Antoni, Tananarive Dew. I never feel like I'm saying her first name correctly. John Dufresne, Vicki Hendricks, Carolina Hospital, and Evelyn Mayerson. It's a lot of people. It took 3.5 lines for me to write down all of the people who wrote Naked Came the Manatee. So this is a book about a frozen head, cryonically frozen head. It's about trying to depose Fidel Castro, and it's mystery and thriller and comedy. But of course, the big thing is that it's written by all of these people. And essentially, my understanding is, let's say this is the order that the chapters are written in. Carl Hyacin started the story, simply passed off his chapter to Elmore Leonard, who immediately just took up the story and wrote his chapter, who passed it on to Dave Barry, who wrote his chapter, etc. A lot of these people, possibly all of them, I don't know, because it's been so long, but a lot of them used characters from their other works. I couldn't tell you who those characters might be, but, you know, this is the kind of thing you read this if you like, say, Carl Hyacin's chapter, you might go and find the books, his other books that have that character. I wonder if Elmore Leonard used his character from Justified. His name's on the tip of my brain, but I can't remember. I want to say it's Waylon something. But anyway, there's a bit of a clash of styles from chapter to chapter, as you're going to have with something like this. But I do think it's a very interesting thing to do. It's been done. This isn't the only time this has been done. There's actually a superhero novel. I think it's just called Indigo, where James A. Moore and a bunch of other authors did this. But it's an interesting bit of literary trivia. I don't know. But interesting book. Then the penultimate, as I like to say, Skyler in Yankee Land by Gregory MacDonald. And this is the follow-up to Skyler, who's a good old Southern boy. And he's gone to Boston to study trumpet at a Boston music school. He's staying with some rich and snooty relatives. And there is a jewel theft, and I believe eventually a murder. I think Skyler is I don't know that he's framed, but he's the main suspect of the jewel theft. And his cousin, 12-year-old Ginny, is the only part of this family that is really on his side. But then she might have something to do with the murder. And Skyler is going to use all his wit and charm and everything to, figure things out. I really, really liked Skyler, the first book. This one was fine. I did not like it as much as the first one. I think I've read it more than once, so it wasn't horrible by any means. And I'm a big fan of Gregory MacDonald, the Fletch books. But it's entertaining. Skyler, I think, is a fun character. Not as good as the first one, though, but still worth reading, especially if you're a Gregory MacDonald fan. Excuse me. And then the final book that I read in November of 1997 is one of those. It is Dogbert's Top Secret Management Handbook. And then the way I have it written down, because this is what it says on the cover, as told to Scott Adams. So, of course, Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert comic strip. And this is a collection of essays and hundreds of the comic strip that is a satire of office, like an office handbook kind of thing. And it's funny. I think it's funny. Scott Adams is a very, very problematic person. Apparently a horrible, horrible human being. But he wrote a funny book back in the day, and I read it. That's all there is to say about that. My question for this video is, how about this? What celebrity would you be interested in reading a book from? That's not the best sentence structure. But are there any celebrities, a celebrity, multiple celebrities out there that you're a fan of? Or even not necessarily a fan, but if they started to write fiction, whether it be mysteries or science fiction or horror, whatever, you'd be like, oh, so-and-so wrote David Duchovny wrote a horror novel. I'm going to check that out. Is there anybody like that, where the celebrity name is what would catch your eye and get you to read that book? It's a little bit of a cheat because, as I said, I had never heard of Anthony Bourdain. But there are people, well, actually, there are people that are like that for me. And there's one coming up sometime. Today I was a little curious and I looked ahead for the next couple years in my notebook. And I know that there's one coming up that fits this bill. So I don't want to say what it is. But, and at first I was going to say Richard Belzer, which is also one that's coming up. But I originally knew him as a comedian, and reading, I think I've only read nonfiction from him, which isn't what I'm talking about. When a comedian writes a comedy book, that's what they do. And I've read, if you've followed this whole series, I've read a lot of that. David Duchovny, I believe, has written a book. I just happened to pick his name. I have not read that book. So I'm trying to think. Who would interest me? I think Richard Belzer has written fiction, and I haven't read it. I don't know now, off the top of my head. I guess for me it would depend on the book, what type of book it was, whether it was horror or science fiction or a mystery or thriller. And even then, I would probably hope that I could read the first chapter or something on Amazon to see if it was interesting. So I've stumped myself. Plus, I'm not. There are directors, actors, musicians that I very much enjoy, but not so much that I'm slavishly going to just consume anything they do. as opposed to, like, I might want to see all their films. Let's say it's a director. I might want to see all their films because they're a director. I've liked everything I've seen by them. I want to keep watching what they do. But just because they write a book doesn't mean I'm going to be, oh, I have to read that book. Even, I see, Kevin Smith comes to mind, but all of his books are nonfiction that I know of, unless you count his comic books. But does that count? I've read comic books specifically because they were written by Kevin Smith. As a matter of fact, it's funny because I was just looking. I don't know, I think it's his complete run on Green Arrow. I have one of the miniseries he did of Batman. He was horribly unreliable when it came to some of these comics. The Batman comic that I have was the first in what may or may not have ended up being a trilogy. After that was done, he was supposed to do a 12-issue miniseries that then he said would be 2 6-issue miniseries, but he only ever did the first 6 issues, and it ends on a horrendous cliffhanger. It's never been finished. He was supposed to do a 2-issue Daredevil. Oh, I have the Actually, I don't know if I have it at the moment. I used to have the Daredevil that he did. But he was supposed to do a 2-issue Daredevil miniseries when the Ben Affleck movie came out. First issue came out. Second issue has never come out. Horrible when it comes to writing comics, but I have enjoyed the comics that I've read by him, and I specifically read those Batman comics because he wrote it. Read that Daredevil story because he wrote it. So I guess, does that fall within the purview of my question? Anyway, what about you? What do you think about this? Do you even care about celebrities and what they do? Of course, we're not talking about gossip and stuff. Creatively, let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is @Ronin5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, is ErikSmith5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH5757. That is all I have for you this week. So until next week, read more books.